Mike Bennett was 39 years old, and for 6 months he hadn't slept in his own bed. He'd turned down contracts, handed his crew to his foreman, and spent every night in a hospital recliner beside his wife Adrienne while she fought stage 2 breast cancer. He tracked her medication schedules better than the nurses did, never once complained, never once left her side. That Thursday night, he stepped out for ice chips and walked back into the doorway of her room. Unseen, his wife's voice, quiet, almost gleeful, talking to her best friend on the phone. "I'm leaving him after," she whispered. "I just need him functional a little longer." 6 months of devotion, and to her, he was a placeholder to be discarded once he was no longer useful. Mike didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there in that hallway, ice melting in his hand, making a decision that would change everything that came after. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The recliner had left a permanent cramp in Mike's lower back. He could feel it the moment he opened his eyes, that dull, grinding ache that started just above his hip and radiated down his left leg. 6 months of sleeping at a 30-degree angle would do that to a man. He'd tried adjusting the chair a dozen different ways. Rolled up hospital blankets behind his lumbar, a travel pillow borrowed from the family waiting room down the hall. Nothing helped for long. He sat up slowly, rubbing his face with both hands. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped their familiar, steady rhythm. Morning light pushed through the narrow gap in the curtains, pale and thin, the kind of light that didn't commit to anything. Adrienne was still asleep. She was curled on her left side, the way she always slept when she felt safe. Her favorite blanket, heavy, cream-colored, with a satin border she liked to rub between her fingers, was tucked up under her chin. Mike had driven home to get that blanket on day 3 of her first round of chemo. She hadn't even asked for it. He'd just known. He checked the time. 5:47 a.m. Then he checked her IV line. Then the drip rate on her antiemetic. Then the paper chart clipped to the foot of her bed, cross-referenced against the typed schedule he kept folded in the front pocket of his worn leather notebook. The nurses had started joking that he knew the protocols better than the residents. They weren't entirely wrong. He'd spent the first 2 weeks after her diagnosis reading everything he could find. Oncology journals, clinical trial summaries, message boards full of people who'd walked this road before him. He'd printed a 40-page document and highlighted it with 3 different colors before her first appointment with Dr. Mensah. The doctor had looked at the binder Mike brought to that initial consultation, then looked at Mike and said quietly, "You've done your homework." Mike had just nodded. What else would I do? He stood, stretched until something cracked in his spine, and moved to the window. Day 180. He knew the number without thinking about it. The same way he used to know how many days were left on a renovation contract, how many load-bearing walls had been assessed, how many inspections remained before the final walkthrough. Mike Bennett had built his career on knowing the numbers, on never letting a single detail fall through the cracks. Bennett Restoration and Design had started as exactly one thing: him. A 26-year-old with a pickup truck, a used table saw, and a reputation for showing up when he said he would. He'd spent 3 years doing handyman work before he landed his first real renovation contract. A gutted Victorian in the East Side district that every other contractor had passed on because the timeline was too tight and the budget too lean. Mike took it. He brought it in 11 days early and $1,500 under budget. Word traveled fast after that. By the time he met Adrienne, he had 12 full-time crew members, 2 active project sites, and a business account with more in it than he'd ever expected to see before 40. His accountant at the time, a blunt, no-nonsense man named Gerald, who wore the same 2 blazers on a rotating schedule, had pulled Mike aside before the engagement. "You built that company alone. She didn't build it with you. Get the prenup." Mike had felt guilty about it, still did, in the small, honest part of himself. But Gerald's logic was clean and hard, and Mike respected clean and hard logic. So he'd brought it up to Adrian over dinner one evening. Careful, a little embarrassed. She'd shrugged. That makes sense. It's your business. I'd expect nothing less from a man who reads contracts twice. She'd even laughed a little. He'd loved her for that. He was still standing at the window when his phone buzzed against the recliner armrest. He crossed the room and picked it up. A message from his foreman, Dale. A photo of the Hartwell job site and a thumbs-up emoji. Tile was in, on schedule. Mike sent back 2 words. Good work. Dale was solid. The crew was solid. He'd handed them over with a full project brief and a contact list and told them to call him only if something was on fire, literally or otherwise. They'd managed. The business hadn't collapsed while he was gone. He was grateful for that. More grateful than he'd said out loud. He set his phone down and looked across the room at Adrienne. That was when he noticed her phone, face down on the bedside tray, angled slightly toward her, the way you set something you want to reach quickly. He hadn't paid it much thought before, but he was paying it thought now. It had been like that for almost 3 weeks. Face down, always within arm's reach. Once, on a morning she'd woken before him, he'd reached past her to get her water cup and accidentally brushed the screen awake. A lock screen he didn't recognize. Not the photo of the 2 of them at the Oregon coast she'd kept on there for 2 years. A blank, dark interface. A 6-digit passcode where there'd never been one before. He'd mentioned it, lightly, the way you mention something that shouldn't be a big deal. Just some hospital privacy thing, she'd said. I read that you should, with all the people coming in and out of the room. It made a kind of sense. He'd let it go. But this morning, just as he was settling back into the recliner with his notebook, the phone buzzed. The screen lit up, face up for once, and the name on the notification sat there bold and plain before it dimmed. Whitney Calloway. Adrian's hand moved in her sleep, faster than he would have expected from someone still half unconscious. Her fingers found the phone and turned it back over in one smooth, practiced motion. Then she stilled again, like it hadn't happened. Mike looked at the ceiling. His jaw was tight. He made himself relax it. She's exhausted. She's been through hell. You don't get to be suspicious of a sick woman for flinching at her phone. He believed that. He almost entirely believed that. He opened his notebook and clicked his pen and wrote down the 6 a.m. medication window so he'd remember to call the nurse on time. The scan results came in just after 2 o'clock. Dr. Mensah came in with a tablet in his hand and something different in the way he was holding his shoulders. Looser, easier, like a man who'd gotten good at delivering hard news and was relieved to deliver something else for a change. The tumor has shrunk significantly, he said, turning the screen so Adrian and Mike could both see the imaging side by side. We're seeing the kind of response we were hoping for. Adrian made a sound that Mike had never heard from her before, something small and broken and full of relief all at once. Her hand found his and squeezed it so hard his knuckles ached. He squeezed back. By 4 o'clock, the room had filled. Her mother came first, then her brother James with his wife and their 2 kids, then Mike's own sister, Octavia, who had driven 90 minutes without being asked the moment Mike texted her. There were flowers from the nurse's station, a mylar balloon shaped like a star that kept drifting into the doorframe, and the sound of overlapping voices saying the same thing in different ways. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. Mike stood near the window and watched Adrian laugh. Really laugh. Bright and easy. For the first time in months. He held on to that. He held on to it very carefully. The hallway outside Adrian's room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. It always did. Mike had stopped noticing it around week 3. What he did notice was Adrian's voice. She had slipped out during a lull in the celebration. Her mother was retelling the same story about the balloon to James's kids, and Octavia was refilling cups, and Mike had watched her go without thinking much of it. She needed air sometimes, space from the noise and the well-meaning. He understood that, but then he heard her laugh. Not the careful, grateful laugh she used with family. Something lighter than that. Easier. The kind of laugh that belongs to a private conversation. The kind where you forget where you are for a minute. He stepped into the hallway without planning to. She was maybe 20 feet away, facing the window at the end of the corridor, one hand pressed flat against the glass. Her voice was low and quick and warm in a way he hadn't heard in months. I know. But it's actually happening. It's really... She turned. Saw him. The warmth shut off like a faucet. Hey, I have to go. Yeah, talk later. She lowered the phone and smiled at him, easy and natural, the way a person smiles when nothing is wrong. That was just Whitney, she said, checking in on the scan news. You know how she is. Yeah, Mike said. I know how she is. They walked back into the room together, her hand finding his arm, and the family swallowed them whole, and the moment dissolved the way those moments do when you're too relieved and too tired to hold on to them. He found the transfer at 6:14 that evening. The room had quieted. Her mother had gone home. James and his family had gone home. Octavia lingered longest, the way she always did, making sure plates were cleared and chairs were back in place before she pulled Mike into the hallway for a quick, firm hug. You're doing good, she said, quiet enough so only he could hear. You've been doing good this whole time. He nodded. He didn't have words for it. After she left, he sat back in the recliner and pulled up the joint business reserve account on his phone, something he checked out of habit, the way other people checked the weather. The account was linked to his personal phone because Dale occasionally needed authorization on material orders, and it was easier. He scrolled down, stopped. A transfer, 11 days ago. $4,200, routed out to an institution he didn't immediately recognize. He stared at it. Adrienne? She was half watching something on her tablet, the volume low. She looked over. There's a transfer here I don't recognize. From the reserve. $4,200. She didn't hesitate. Didn't even sit up. That's the co-pay backlog, she said. I had Whitney help me take care of some of the outstanding stuff. I didn't want you juggling it on top of everything else. I could have handled that. I know you could. She reached over and touched his wrist. That's why I wanted to do something. You've been carrying all of it. Let me carry a little. He looked at her hand on his wrist. He thought about the scan, the tumor shrinking, the sound she'd made when Dr. Mensah turned the screen around. Okay, he said. Thank you. He put the phone away. The notebook in his head got a new page. He didn't let himself think about it that way. Not right then, but it got one anyway. Visiting hours ended at 8. The room settled into its nighttime version of itself. Quieter, with the hallway sounds going dim and the monitors keeping their low, steady rhythm. Adrienne's eyelids were heavy by 7:30. The good day exhaustion catching up with her, the kind of tired that follows relief. You want ice chips? Mike asked. She nodded without opening her eyes. Please. He grabbed the plastic cup from the tray table and stepped out. The ice machine was at the far end of the ward, past the nurse's station and the family waiting area, with the fish tank nobody ever looked at. He filled the cup slowly, listening to the machine grind and rattle, and stood there a moment longer than he needed to. He thought about Dale's thumbs-up emoji. He thought about the Hartwell tile job. He thought about the stack of vendor invoices sitting in a folder on his home desk that he hadn't touched since September. He thought about Adrienne's laugh in the hallway, the way it had stopped the instant she saw him. He headed back. The door to her room was almost closed. He could see the narrow strip of yellow light from the hallway, the edge of her blanket, the dark shape of the monitors. And he could hear her voice, low and unhurried, comfortable, the voice of someone who believed they were completely alone. Mike's hand rested against the doorframe. He didn't push the door open. He stood there, cup of ice chips cold against his palm, and he listened. The voice slipped through the gap in the door like smoke. Low, easy, unhurried. And honestly, Whit, I feel like myself again. Like actually myself. Mike didn't move. The cup of ice chips was cold in his hand. He stood with his shoulder almost touching the doorframe, and he did not breathe. I know it's been a lot. A short pause. Then a quiet laugh. The same laugh from the hallway earlier. The one that belonged somewhere else. But I'm almost through it. Mensa said another round. And then we monitor. So, not long now. Not long now. He heard the shift in her voice before the words even came. A small drop in pitch. More private. Almost gleeful. I'm leaving him after. The hallway went very still. Once treatment's done, and I've got my strength back, I'm done playing devoted wife. His hand pressed flat against the wall. The cup crinkled slightly under his grip. I just need him functional a little longer. There was more after that. Whitney's voice, muffled and indistinct, and then Adrian saying something low and reassuring, the kind of tone you use when someone is nervous, and you are not. But Mike had already stopped processing words. The sounds washed past him. His mind had gone somewhere very quiet and very cold, the same place it went when a load-bearing wall turned out to be structurally compromised, and everything had to stop until he knew exactly what he was dealing with. He took one step back from the door, then another. He turned and walked slowly back down the hallway, past the nurse's station, past the fish tank. He stood at the ice machine again, though the cup was already full, and he stared at the wall above it. Functional. That was the word she'd used. Not present. Not here. Not even his name. Functional. Like a tool. Like a piece of equipment you keep running until the job is done and then you set it down. He thought about the 6 months in the recliner, the medications he'd memorized, the vendor invoices sitting untouched so he could be in that room every single day, the transfer out of the business reserve he hadn't pushed back on because she'd touched his wrist, and he'd been so tired and so grateful for the good news that he'd let it go. The anger was there. Of course it was. It moved through him like heat under a floor. Present. Real. Impossible to ignore once you knew to look for it. But he didn't go back through the door. He thought about her face when Dr. Mensa turned the screen around. He thought about the chemo ports, and the nights she'd shaken so hard the monitors alarmed, and the way she'd gripped his hand through the bad rounds. He thought about what functional might look like to a man who walked in there right now and said what he'd heard. And he thought, not yet. Not because she deserved protecting. That was done. That was gone. But because he didn't know the shape of this yet. He didn't know how deep it went, or how long it had been building, or what after actually meant in terms of money and property and the business he'd spent 11 years making into something real. He knew how to read a structure before he touched it. He knew how to find the rot before he pulled the wall apart. He would do this right. He went back to the room. He pushed the door open with his shoulder, cup in hand, quiet so as not to wake her if she'd drifted off. She was lying back against the pillow, phone face down on the tray table, her eyes closed. "Thank you," she murmured, without opening them. "Of course," he said. He set the cup on the tray. He sat back in the recliner. He pulled the thin hospital blanket over his lap, and he watched the monitor's pulse in the dark, and he did not say one word about what he'd heard. He waited until midnight. Her breathing had gone slow and even, the deep kind that didn't break easily. He slipped out to the family waiting area at the end of the hall, the one with the fish tank and the uncomfortable chairs, and he sat down in the corner and called Octavia. She picked up on the second ring. She always did. Mike. Not a question. Just his name, in the tone she used when she already knew something was coming. "I need a favor," he said. "I need you to quietly pull statements, joint account, the business reserve, anything attached to my name and Adrienne's together." A pause. Short. She was already thinking. How far back? A year? Maybe 14 months? Can you tell me why? He looked at the fish tank. One of the fish drifted past a plastic castle and disappeared behind it. Not yet. I just need to see what's there first. Okay, she said. No argument, no questions he hadn't invited. Just that one word, steady as a nail driven clean. I'll start in the morning. Thank you, Tavi. He ended the call. He sat there a moment longer, the waiting room quiet around him. Then he went back to his room, pulled the small spiral notebook from his jacket pocket, the one he used for job notes, and he opened it to the first blank page. He wrote the date. He wrote the time. And then, in the same careful print he used for structural measurements and load calculations, he wrote down every word he'd heard through that door. The call came on a Tuesday. Mike was in the parking garage, sitting in his truck with the engine off, eating a sandwich he didn't taste. He'd driven down to grab a change of clothes from home and check in with his foreman, Darnell, about a tile job on the east side that was already 3 days behind. He'd been back at the hospital by 10 that morning. His phone buzzed against the center console. "Octavia!" He answered before the second buzz. "Talk to me," he said. She didn't ease into it. That wasn't her way. The transfer Adrienne flagged as a copay payment, the one for $18.40 in early October. It didn't go to the hospital. He stopped chewing. "I pulled the destination routing," she said. It cleared through a title company, Meridian Settlement Services, based out of the city. Mike set the sandwich down on the wrapper. He looked at the concrete pillar in front of the truck. There was an old parking sticker on it, half peeled, curled at the edges. He focused on it because he needed something still to look at. "That's one transfer," he said. "It's the one I can confirm so far." A pause. He could hear her turning pages. "But there are 2 others that flagged. Both from the business reserve, not the joint personal account. Different amounts, different dates. Both coded as vendor payments in the memo line. Which vendors? They're not in your vendor ledger, Mike." I cross-checked. He let out a slow breath through his nose. The business reserve was money he was careful about. It wasn't a slush fund. It was survival money. Payroll buffer? Material deposits? The kind of account you built up over years and guarded because one bad month without it could mean you didn't make crew on Friday. He thought about the past 6 months, the vendor invoices he'd pushed back, the materials order he'd split into 2 payments to keep the cash flow breathing, the quiet way he'd moved money around so that nobody on his crew went short, so that Darnell didn't have to have uncomfortable conversations, so that the business he'd spent 11 years building didn't show cracks while he sat in a hospital recliner. All of it. And she'd been pulling from that same account and pointing it somewhere else. "How much, total?" he asked. "I need 2 more days to confirm the full picture. But based on what I can see right now, another page turn north of $12,000, possibly more. North of $12,000. Gone. Dressed up as copays and vendor payments. Trace the title company," he said. His voice was even. He made sure of it. "Find out what they were processing. If there's a property attached to these transfers, I want an address." "Already started," she said. "I'll call you Thursday." He ended the call. He sat in the truck for a long moment, both hands resting on his knees, and he looked at the half-peeled sticker on the parking pillar, and he breathed. Then he picked up his sandwich and finished it. Because he had a long afternoon ahead, and falling apart in a parking garage wasn't going to help anyone. That evening, after the dinner trays were cleared and the floor had gone quiet, Mike sat beside Adrienne's bed, and they talked the way they sometimes did on calm nights. Low voices, no agenda. The good night stretch before she got tired. He kept his hands easy, his voice relaxed. "You know what I've been thinking about lately?" he said. "Getting out of that neighborhood when this is all done. Something with a real yard. Adrian smiled, without opening her eyes all the way. You've said that for 3 years. I mean it this time. He leaned back in the recliner. I'd want something with character, not one of those new builds. She shifted against the pillow. I've always loved Alden Park. Those craftsman houses, the big front porches. She said it lightly, offhand, like a thought that had floated up from nowhere. But it wasn't from nowhere. He heard it land, and he filed it, clean and flat, the way he filed everything now. Yeah, he said. Nice area. She was asleep inside 20 minutes. He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and opened the browser. Quiet, screen brightness turned down. He searched Whitney Calloway's realtor profile, the one on her agency's website with the headshot and the list of active properties. Most of her listings were what you'd expect. Condos, a few colonials, a townhome in the Northwest Corridor. And then, near the bottom of the page, under a tab labeled Coming Soon, one listing, Alden Park. No full address, just the neighborhood name and a thumbnail. A craftsman-style house with a wide front porch, fresh paint, new sod along the front walk. Listed by Whitney Calloway. Mike stared at it for a long moment. Then he took a screenshot, set his phone face down on the tray table, and looked at the ceiling. The drive to Alden Park took 18 minutes. Mike had told the nurses he was stepping out for coffee. He didn't explain beyond that. Nobody asked. He parked one house down from the address he'd found after digging past Whitney's public-facing profile into the county property search. It had taken him 40 minutes the night before, after Adrian had fallen asleep, cross-referencing the neighborhood name against recent filings. But he'd found it. He sat in the truck and looked at it through the windshield. It was a Craftsman. Deep green paint, bright white trim, a wide-covered porch with 2 wooden columns, freshly stained. New sod running in a clean strip along the front walk. Still that too bright green of recently laid grass, the seams just barely visible if you knew what to look for. Mike knew what to look for. He'd built enough of them to know the rest, too. The way the gutters had been replaced, the color matched perfectly. The new light fixture by the front door, brushed bronze. Somebody had put real money into this renovation. Real thought. At the end of the front walk, a yard sign, Whitney Calloway. Calloway and Associates, and below her name, in bold red letters clipped to the post, sold, contingent. Mike sat with that for a moment. He pulled out his notebook, the small, dark blue one he'd bought at the drugstore 2 days after he overheard Adrian in the hospital room. He flipped to the 3rd page. He ran his finger down the dates he'd written out. October 9th through the 14th. Adrian had texted him, not called. Said she was feeling bad. Said the fatigue had spiked and she needed to rest without visitors, even him. She'd been gentle about it. Apologetic, even. Don't worry, I just need a couple days. I'll call when I'm feeling up to it. He'd respected it. He'd stayed away for 5 days. He'd sent food to the hospital through a delivery service and texted her good morning every day and slept at home in their bed for the first time in 3 months. The purchase contingency date stamped in the county record was October 11th. He closed the notebook. He called Octavia from the truck, parked right there in front of the house. The listing, he said when she picked up. Was it ever on MLS? Zillow? Anything public? A short pause. He could hear her clicking through something. No, she said. It was never entered into any standard database. I checked 3 of them this morning before you called. Another click. It was structured as a private off-market sale. No public listing. No open houses. No digital footprint unless you knew the address and went straight to the county recorder. Which most people don't do. Which almost nobody does, she said. A standard title search, the kind a divorce attorney would run, or a spouse doing basic due diligence. It wouldn't have surfaced this. Not without the direct address. Mike looked at the house, at the porch, at the new sod. That wasn't an accident, he said. No, Octavia said. It wasn't. Somebody set this up knowing exactly how title searches work and exactly how to stay outside the normal search radius. That's not a seller asking for privacy, Mike. That's someone who knows the system using it to hide something from a specific person. Whitney was a realtor, had been for 11 years. She knew every corner of the process, the databases, the filings, the off-market structures that kept things invisible to anyone who wasn't handed the address directly. She hadn't just helped Adrian find a house. She'd built a wall around it. She knew what she was doing, Mike said. Every step of it. He thanked Octavia and ended the call. He sat for another minute, looking at the front porch of the house his wife had bought with his business reserve money, hidden behind a structure her best friend had carefully built to make sure he'd never find it. Then he put the truck in drive and went back to the hospital. He was back before 4 o'clock. He brought Adrian a cup of the good tea from the place down the street, the one with the honey already mixed in, the way she liked it. He set it on her tray table without fanfare. He asked how her afternoon had been. She said tired. He said that was okay. He refilled her water pitcher and checked the time on her evening medications and talked to her for 20 minutes about nothing. A house flip show she liked, a funny story Darnell had texted him from the job site. He made her laugh once. He gave no sign. Not one. That night, after visiting hours ended and he was in the parking garage again, he sat in the truck and scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in 4 months. Dorian Michaels. College roommate, family law attorney. The kind of man who didn't panic, who asked the right questions, who moved carefully when the facts were worth protecting. Mike pressed call. Dorian answered on the 3rd ring. Mike, it's been a while. It has, Mike said. I need a favor. A quiet one. The shift change at Mercy General happened at 7 in the evening. Nurses trading clipboards, orderlies pushing carts through the main corridor, a fresh round of visitors filtering in through the lobby doors. It was the one window in the day when the hallways were busy enough that 2 men standing outside near the parking structure looked like nothing at all. Dorian was already there when Mike came down. He looked the same as always, pressed dark jacket, no tie, the kind of calm that didn't come from not caring. It came from having sat across from worse things than this and knowing exactly what to do with them. He had a manila folder tucked under his arm. He didn't open it right away. They shook hands. Neither of them smiled. Walk with me, Dorian said. They moved away from the entrance, toward the far end of the parking structure, where the overhead lights buzzed faintly, and no one was within earshot. Dorian opened the folder. His name is Preston Hale, Dorian said, creative director at Adrian's agency. You know him? Mike thought about it. A face at the company holiday party 2 years back. Tall, well-dressed, the kind of guy who laughed a little too easily and stood a little too close to whoever he was talking to. I've met him once, Mike said. Maybe twice. He's listed as co-borrower on the mortgage pre-approval for the Alden Park property. Dorian kept his voice low and even, like he was reading a weather report. Not a backup signer, not a reference, co-borrower. His income, his credit, his name on the application alongside hers. Mike looked at the folder. At the page Dorian was holding up. He saw Preston's name printed in clean black type next to Adrian's. He didn't say anything. I cross-referenced the timeline, Dorian continued. Credit pull for the joint pre-approval goes back 14 months. Adrian's diagnosis was 8 months ago. He let that land. The relationship, whatever form it was taking, predates the cancer by over a year. 14 months. Mike did the math without meaning to. 14 months ago, he and Adrian had been on a trip to Savannah. A long weekend. She'd said it was the best trip they'd ever taken. He kept his face still. There's more, Dorian said. He pulled a second sheet from behind the first. Oncology appointment sign-in records. Dr. Naresh's office, 4 months ago. I requested them through proper channels. The office cooperated once I explained the legal context. He handed the sheet to Mike directly. Mike read it. Preston Hale had signed in as a guest at Adrienne's April 14th appointment. The visitor designation on the form read, "Work Colleague Support Visit." He was in the building, Mike said, in the waiting room, according to the log. He didn't go back with her, but he was there. Dorian paused. I also pulled a text thread that Adrienne backed up to a shared cloud account. One she may not have remembered was syncing to a tablet you're listed as a co-owner on. He said it carefully, making sure Mike understood it was clean. Legal. In the messages, after that appointment, Preston tells her exactly what to say. If you ever asked who was there with her, he coached her on the wording. He told her to say the agency had sent someone to check in on a work matter she'd been managing remotely. Mike handed the sheet back. 1.5 years, maybe more. She'd been building this while he was building contracts, while he was reading her medication schedules, while he was sleeping in a recliner so she wouldn't wake up alone in a hospital room. "Okay," he said. Dorian looked at him for a moment. "Okay? Keep going," Mike said. "Whatever else you find, keep going." Dorian nodded once. He closed the folder. Mike was back on Adrienne's floor by 7:40. The chemotherapy had hit her hard that afternoon, the nurses told him. She'd been nauseated since 3 o'clock. He found her pale against the pillow, a small kidney-shaped basin on the tray table beside her, her eyes half open and miserable. He didn't hesitate. He pulled his chair close, refilled her water, and held the basin steady when she needed it. He put a cool, damp cloth on the back of her neck the way she liked. He spoke quietly, nothing important, just his voice in the room so she wasn't alone in the dark with the feeling. He did all of it without being asked. She reached for his hand at one point and held it. He let her. It was past 10 when she finally slept. Her breathing evened out. The room settled into its familiar hum. The IV monitor, the low hall noise, the faint beep from the nurse's station down the corridor. Mike stood slowly, careful not to wake her. He stepped out into the hallway and leaned against the wall beside her door, under the pale, fluorescent light. He pulled out his phone. He opened a text to Octavia. "Need you to look at something specific," he typed. "Any recent changes to our life insurance policy, beneficiary updates, allocation changes, anything that moved in the last year. Can you pull that?" He hit send. Then he slid the phone back into his pocket and stood there in the quiet hallway, still and patient, waiting for nothing in particular. The document came through on a Tuesday. Octavia sent it as a secure PDF with a short message above it. "Call me when you've read this." Mike was in the hospital cafeteria, a cup of coffee going cold in front of him. He opened the file. It was a policy amendment form. Adrienne's life insurance, a separate policy she'd held before they married. One Mike had never thought twice about. The amendment was dated 11 months ago, 3 months before her diagnosis. She had quietly increased her beneficiary allocation. The change itself wasn't unusual on the surface. People updated policies, but Octavia had flagged the timing in a note at the bottom of the page, underlined in red. Amendment filed 11 months ago. Diagnosis confirmed 8 months ago. She updated the policy before she got sick. Mike set the phone face down on the table. He picked up his coffee, took a sip. It was cold. He turned the phone over and called Octavia. She answered on the first ring. "You read it." "I read it," he said. "I'm not saying it proves intent," Octavia said, "but it's a pattern. You document enough of these, Mike, and a pattern stops being coincidence." A pause. "The financial picture is done. I finished the full trace this morning." He already knew it was bad. He asked anyway. "How much?" $38,400, give or take a few hundred in fees. Her voice was steady, but he knew her. He could hear the anger underneath it, held down tight. "Taken over 7 months. Small pulls, Mike." She was careful. "Moved it in pieces so nothing would flag the account alerts you had set up. $38,000. Materials money, payroll money. The reserve he had built over 4 years of early mornings and low margins, money he'd delayed paying vendors with, money he'd personally covered out of his own savings when the business account ran short. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" Octavia said. Same word Dorian had said. Same disbelief. "Send everything to Dorian," Mike said. "The full trace, all of it." Dorian called him that same evening. He had more. During discovery groundwork, Dorian had obtained messages from the shared cloud account, the same tablet sync that had produced Preston's coaching test after the oncology appointment. There were more messages in that thread. Longer ones, more specific. Dorian read one aloud over the phone, his voice flat and precise. In it, Preston had written, "Don't move before treatment ends. If you file while he's still playing caretaker, you're the villain. The press, your family, everyone will see it that way. Wait until remission. Let him finish the arc. Then you walk out clean." Adrienne had replied, "I know. I just hate how long it takes." Preston again, "Think of it as the last thing he does for you." Mike sat with that for a moment. In his truck in the hospital parking garage, engine off, the concrete walls around him a dull gray in the low light. He'd known she was planning to leave. He'd known since the hallway outside her room, the ice chips cold in his hand, her voice almost gleeful on the other side of the door. But this was something different. She hadn't missed what he was doing for her. She hadn't taken it for granted or failed to notice. She had looked at it clearly, calculated it, and decided it was useful. His 6 months in that recliner, the medication logs, the cool cloth on the back of her neck, the basin he held when the nausea hit at 3 in the morning, all of it had been factored into an exit plan like a line item in a budget. Let him finish the arc. He put the phone down on the passenger seat and stared straight ahead. After a while, he picked it back up. "Draft the divorce papers," he told Dorian. "Quiet. Nothing filed yet. But I want it ready." He kept his voice level. "Structure everything around the prenup. The business accounts, the reserve, the diversion trail Octavia documented. I want it airtight before anything moves." "Already started," Dorian said. "I'll have a draft to you by the end of the week." "Good." Mike opened the truck door. "I've got to get back upstairs." He walked back into her room carrying the cup of ice chips she'd asked for before he came down. She was awake, propped up slightly, the television on low. She looked at him when he came through the door and gave him a small, tired smile. "You were gone a while," she said. "Ran into one of the nurses," he said easily. "She was asking about the contractor I recommended for her bathroom renovation." Adrienne laughed, a soft sound. "Even here, business doesn't stop," he said. He sat down in his chair and set the ice chips within her reach. She reached over and patted his hand once, then turned back to the television. 3 weeks later, Adrienne's final scan came back clean. No evidence of disease. The tumor was gone. Her oncologist used the word remission, and Adrienne cried, and her mother cried, and her sister pulled everyone into a hug that seemed to last a long time. Her family started talking about a celebration before they'd even left the hospital floor. The shift in Adrienne was small at first. A text she didn't mention. A call she took in the bathroom with the door shut. A brightness in her eyes that hadn't been there during the worst months, which made sense, he told himself. Remission would do that. Anyone would feel lighter. But it wasn't just that. She stopped asking him what time he was coming home. She stopped looping him into conversations about next year the way she used to. When Whitney visited twice that week, twice when she'd barely come around during the worst of the chemo, Adrienne lit up in a way that had nothing to do with getting well. They sat together in the living room and laughed at things Mike couldn't hear from the kitchen, their voices low, easy, close. He watched it from the doorway. He didn't say anything. Dorian called on Wednesday morning, 4 days before the celebration. "Everything's ready," Dorian said. "Paperwork is signed, dated, and sitting on my desk. The moment you say go, I file. Business accounts? Mike asked. Fully secured as of Monday. She no longer has transfer access to the reserve. The change logged as a routine security update. Nothing that would flag. Mike was standing in his home office, the same room where he'd signed the original prenup 8 years ago, sitting across a desk from a notary while Adrienne sat next to him, unbothered, scrolling her phone while she waited for her turn to sign. He hadn't thought about that moment in years. Now he thought about it every day. I need 2 seats at the table Saturday, Mike said. You and Octavia. Family side. A pause. You're doing it at the party. She planned this whole thing as a finish line, Mike said. I'm just letting her cross it. Dorian was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll be there. He called Octavia next. Saturday, he said. Come to the celebration. She didn't ask why. That was the thing about Octavia. She never needed it spelled out twice. What do you need me to bring? The full trace, hard copies, organized by date. Already printed, she said. Has been for a week. He almost smiled. Of course it has. Mike. Her voice shifted slightly. Softer. You sure about this? Yeah, he said. Okay, she said. I'll be there. Adrienne spent Friday getting her nails done with Whitney. She came home glowing. New color, new earrings, a dress bag from a boutique hung over her arm. She held it up briefly to show him before carrying it upstairs, chatting about the restaurant, the people who were coming, how good it would be to finally celebrate properly. She was warm, present, almost the woman he'd married. Almost. Mike smiled at the right moments and asked about the dress, and said it sounded like it was going to be a great night. And it was going to be. That night, after she'd fallen asleep, he sat at his desk. The notebook was in front of him. 41 pages now, covered in his careful handwriting. Dates, transfers, amounts, observations. Clipped inside the front cover were the photocopied documents Octavia had assembled. The title company trail, the policy amendment, the purchase timeline, the messages Dorian had pulled from the cloud sync. Don't move before treatment ends. Let him finish the arc. Then you walk out clean. He read through it one last time, slowly, every page. Then he closed the notebook, set it on top of the folder Dorian had couriered over, and stacked both neatly in the center of his desk. Everything was in order. He turned off the desk lamp and went upstairs. He slept for 7 hours straight. The first full night in months. No recliner, no medication alarms, no basin on the nightstand. Just dark and quiet, and the steady certainty of a man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for morning. The restaurant was a private dining space downtown. Warm lighting, wood paneling, round tables draped in white linen. Adrienne's mother had arranged it. Flowers on every table. A framed photo from one of Adrienne's better days in the hospital, placed near the entrance like a small monument to what they'd all come through together. Mike arrived at 6:15. Octavia was beside him, composed in a dark blazer, her small leather portfolio tucked under one arm. Dorian walked on his other side, jacket pressed, expression easy. The host took their coats. Mike scanned the room as they walked in. Adrienne was on the far side near the bar, wearing the dress from the boutique bag. Her hair was down. She looked healthy. Beautiful, even. She was mid-laugh at something someone had just said, her hand resting lightly on her mother's arm, her eyes bright. Whitney stood 2 feet away, champagne glass in hand, watching Adrienne with the satisfied look of someone who believed everything had gone exactly according to plan. Mike watched them for a moment. He found his table. He sat down. The room was full and warm by 7 o'clock. Adrienne's uncle had made a toast already, something short and emotional about strength and second chances. Her younger sister cried a little. Her mother dabbed her eyes with a folded napkin and squeezed Mike's arm across the table, the same way she had 100 times over the last 6 months. You held this family together, she said. Her name was Carol. She had called Mike every Sunday during the worst weeks of treatment, just to check on him. "I mean that, Mike." "You really did." "I know you do," he said. He meant it too, just not the way she thought. Dinner was cleared. The cake was brought out. White frosting, a single word written across the top in gold script. Remission. Everyone clapped. Adrienne closed her eyes for just a moment when she saw it, and even Mike, knowing everything he knew, understood that the relief she felt was real. The cancer had been real. The fear had been real. That was the part that still sat heavy in him. Even now, he let the moment pass. He let her have the candles and the applause and the photograph her sister took. Then he stood up. The room settled almost immediately. Mike wasn't the type to make noise, so when he moved, people noticed. "I want to say something," he said. His voice was calm, not loud. He didn't need it to be loud. The room was small and everyone was already looking at him. 6 months ago, I moved a recliner next to my wife's hospital bed and I stayed there. He looked around the table slowly. I missed job walkthroughs. I handed my crew to my foreman. I paid her medical bills out of my business reserve, and I delayed vendor payments to keep my guys employed at the same time. He paused. I did all of that because I believed that's what you do for someone you love. Adrienne was watching him from across the table. Her expression was still pleasant, careful, the practiced warmth of a woman who assumed this was a toast. "That's the kind of man you are," her mother said softly. "It is," Mike agreed. He reached down and picked up the folder Dorian had set quietly beside his chair 15 minutes earlier. "But I need to share something with this family, because a lot of you spent those 6 months supporting us both, and you deserve to know what was actually happening." The room shifted. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle change in the air, the way a room feels when it realizes it isn't where it thought it was. Adrienne's smile stayed in place for exactly 2 more seconds. Then it didn't. He laid it out the same way he'd organized it in the notebook. Chronological, clean. The transfer from the business reserve, not to the hospital billing department, but to a title company. The off-market house listing in the neighborhood Adrienne had called her dream area. The sold contingent sign. The purchase date that matched a week she'd told him she was too sick for visitors. He said Whitney's name without looking at her. Whitney structured the listing specifically off-market, he said, so it wouldn't surface in a standard title search. She's been working on this with Adrienne for months. Whitney's champagne glass lowered slowly to the table. Adrienne's mother turned her head and looked at Whitney. Just looked at her, long and hard. Whitney said nothing. Then Mike said Preston's name. He said it the same way he said everything else. Quiet, even, without heat. He explained the co-borrower listing on the mortgage pre-approval. He explained the timeline, over a year before the diagnosis. He mentioned the oncology appointment, the coaching, the cover story. Adrienne's father pushed back from the table slightly, like he needed air. Her sister said, very quietly, "What?" Mike opened the folder and slid a single printed page toward the center of the table. The message thread Dorian had pulled from the cloud sync, the one where Adrienne and Preston discussed optics. He read one line aloud. "Don't move before treatment ends. Let him finish the arc. Then you walk out clean." The silence that followed was total. Then Carol, Adrienne's mother, the woman who had called Mike every Sunday, who had told him he was holding the family together, turned to look at her daughter. Adrienne. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it wasn't soft. It was shaking. "Tell me that's not your words." Adrienne opened her mouth. Nothing came out. "Tell me," Carol said again. Louder now. Dorian stood. He was unhurried. He buttoned his jacket, picked up his own folder, and addressed the table the way he might address a room in a courthouse. Measured, clear, no performance to it. The prenup Mike and Adrienne signed 8 years ago protects all assets Mike held prior to and throughout their marriage, including Bennett Restoration and Design. Octavia Bennett Reyes has documented a financial trail confirming approximately $40,000 diverted from his business reserve into the concealed property purchase. He looked at Adrienne directly. There is no legal claim to his business. None. He set the divorce papers on the table in front of her. "You've been served." The room erupted. Adrienne's sister stood up. Her father's chair scraped back hard against the floor. Carol was already on her feet, and the look on her face, the look she was giving her own daughter, was not grief. It was fury. Whitney stood too, as if movement might help her. It didn't. Mike watched it for exactly 1 moment. Then he picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, nodded once to Octavia and Dorian, and walked toward the exit. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He left Adrienne in the room she had arranged, surrounded by the family she had counted on, facing every word she had ever whispered when she thought no one was listening. The house fell through first. 12 days after the celebration, the title company flagged the transaction. Under Georgia law, a property purchased using marital funds required both spouses' signatures on the final closing documents. Mike had never signed. He had never been asked to sign. That was the point. The whole structure of the deal had been built to keep him out of it entirely. It didn't matter anymore. The financing collapsed. The lender pulled the pre-approval. The contingency expired. Whitney's off-market listing went back to active status, and the Craftsman with the fresh sod and the gold fixtures sat empty again, waiting for a buyer who had nothing to hide. Adrienne was left with nothing to show for $40,000 except a paper trail that now belonged to Dorian's case file. Carol Bennett stopped returning Adrienne's calls the morning after the celebration. It wasn't dramatic. There was no final argument, no door slammed. Carol simply went quiet. She had spent 6 months calling Mike every Sunday, checking on him, thanking him, telling him he was holding the family together. She had meant every word of it. Learning that her daughter had calculated his devotion into an exit strategy, had used the cancer, the chemo, the hospital recliner, all of it as cover, was not something Carol was built to forgive quickly, maybe not ever. She called Mike instead. Once a week, same as before. They didn't talk about Adrienne. They talked about his crew, his projects, a kitchen restoration he was proud of. She asked if he was eating. He said yes. That was enough for both of them. Preston's termination came through on a Tuesday. Mike had filed the report 3 weeks after the confrontation. A formal, documented complaint submitted directly to the agency's managing partners, outlining Preston's use of insider client financial information to help structure a concealed property purchase on behalf of an employee. The complaint was precise. It cited dates, referenced the co-borrower listing, and attached supporting documentation Dorian had compiled. The agency had no good options. Preston had used his position, his access, and the agency's professional credibility to benefit a personal relationship at a client's indirect expense. The managing partners met on a Wednesday and reached a decision by Thursday. Preston cleaned out his office that Friday. His wife, Renee, had already moved out by then. She hadn't learned about the affair from Mike. She hadn't needed to. Preston's own phone had done the work. She'd found the message thread herself. 3 nights after the celebration story quietly circulated through their shared social circle. The timeline alone was over a year before Adrienne's diagnosis. The whole marriage, laid out in timestamps. Renee took the kids to her mother's house and called a lawyer on Monday morning. Preston was left with an empty office, an empty house, and a name that now meant something very specific to every creative director and agency partner in a 30-mile radius. 2 firms he'd contacted about openings stopped returning calls once the story reached them secondhand. The local ad industry was not large. Word moved fast. Whitney's review opened quietly, the way these things tend to. Mike's formal complaint to the brokerage described, in plain and documented terms, how Whitney had structured an off-market listing specifically to prevent a standard title search from surfacing a marital asset. The ethics board used words like willful concealment and conflict of interest in their preliminary findings. The review was ongoing, but the interim consequences were immediate. 2 referral partnerships were suspended, and 3 clients who had heard the full story through Adrienne's own friend group quietly moved their listings to other agents. The friend group itself had fractured. Once Adrienne's family stopped defending her, the social circle followed. These things tend to work that way. Whitney had built her professional reputation inside that same circle, the same neighborhood dinners and birthday parties and charity events where everyone knew everyone. Now they knew this too. Her friendship with Adrienne, the one she had torched her career ethics to protect, didn't survive either. There's a particular kind of ending that comes when 2 people have used each other up. They didn't argue about it. They just stopped calling. 18 months passed. Bennett Restoration and Design took on 2 new commercial contracts and added 3 crew members to handle the load. Mike's foreman, a steady man named Gerald, who had kept everything running during the hospital months, got a raise and a title that reflected what he'd actually been doing all along. Mike never told the story publicly. He didn't need to. These things have a way of traveling on their own, through a client who knew someone at the agency, through a contractor who heard it from a lawyer's paralegal, through the quiet respect that builds when people understand that a man held himself together under pressure and came out clean on the other side. The new house was modest. Mike had designed parts of it himself: the entryway, the back porch, the kitchen layout built for someone who actually cooked. He'd broken ground 11 months ago. He moved in 6 months after that. He was standing on the back porch now, the evening settling in around him, the yard still unfinished in the way that new things are. He thought about the recliner. He thought about the notebook. He thought about standing in a hospital hallway with a cup of ice chips, hearing his wife's voice in the dark. He had not confronted her that night. He had chosen silence instead of anger, patience instead of collapse. People sometimes mistook that kind of quiet for weakness. It wasn't weakness. It never had been. It was the plan. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.